Okay, so that was all about sparking interest. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is increasing their confidence that they could succeed in your classes. So, um, part of the problem is that people don't realize, they just assume that young women or minority students, like this is a direct quote, don't have the kind of brain it takes to succeed in computing. This is totally inaccurate. Um, and what it does is it creates a situation where you need to work to help build the confidence of the student that she could succeed in your class. Now, one thing this means is that you don't want to recruit students into a class where they don't have adequate preparation, where you teach it, for example, in a way that relies on calculus, but the student hasn't taken calculus yet. So you would either need to change the way you teach that class or not recruit that student until after she's taken calculus. So consider that. We're not talking about building false confidence here. We're talking about realistic confidence that the student can succeed. And a lot of this depends on you and how you teach your class. So in order to build that confidence, you can showcase the successes of your current and former students. Specifically say things in conversation with the student like, you would be great at this. I want you in my class. Those kinds of messages make the student believe, or at least be willing to believe, that she might be able to do well in your class. And that's what she wants. She doesn't want to get into a situation where she's going to fail. She wants to get into something where she feels like she can succeed. So as you teach your class, you also want to provide opportunities for the student to experience success. You might, as part of your recruiting, go into a class and have a simple problem that's relevant to computing that you have the students work on so that they can actually experience that challenge of the problem. Again, make sure that you set it at the right level so that they can succeed at it, but not have it be overwhelmingly simple. And so that it builds the confidence. You can say then, this is the kind of thing you'll be doing in my class. I know you can do this because you've done X, Y, and Z before, and that will help you do a good job in this class. Or I know you're a good student and you're conscientious, and if you do the work, you will succeed in my class. Talk about how you promote student success in your class. All of these things contribute to cultivating confidence in the student that you're trying to recruit. Also, as a general approach, it's important for you to emphasize growth and in intelligence, that students people don't have just fixed ability. In other words, I'm not denying that there are Mozarts out there in the world, but that doesn't mean that almost everybody can't become a competent pianist. And it's like that with computing, that some things will be challenging. And the effort that's put into meeting that challenge actually increases the intellectual ability of the student, the ability of the student to master that task. So putting effort into overcoming the challenge in difficult material is very worthwhile because, like with your muscles in athletics, you're exercising your brain and, as a consequence, increasing your capacity. And that's an important approach. You may have heard of this from Carol Dweck, has done quite a bit of work on this approach to education and how important it is to take that kind of developing ability approach, as opposed to, your class is not about checking whether or not this student is a computing Mozart. Okay? Your class is about building competence in your students. And if you scaffold your material appropriately, there should be no emergencies. Instead, what should happen is that the student takes sort of like baby steps and builds up their competence and their skill in this discipline. And by dealing with the challenging material, something that is challenging to most people in the beginning, and it's a good thing for you to normalize that, they can master it with effort and with your help. So, again, when you talk about the course, you want to assure your students that if they do the work, they can succeed. You want to convey to them that the projects are interesting. Show them examples. And remember, examples that are designed to relate to interests they already have. Show how it's relevant to their career preparation. And explicitly invite them into the class. Encourage them to be part of your class. Okay, now I'm going to start talking about belonging and how you help students feel like they would actually belong in your class. This is something that you as the instructor want to work on because, again, this is how students decide on their occupations. It's one of the factors that comes into play, whether or not I feel like I belong with the people who are already there. Now, one thing this says is that if the people who are already there are way different from me, which really is your objective in actively recruiting underrepresented groups, recruit members of underrepresented groups, in friendship groups. Don't go for the single young woman who's going to be in your class or the single minority student who's going to be in your class. If you get somebody whose interest you've sparked and you've convinced them that they could succeed, if they don't bring it up and ask you, you should say to them, do you have friends that could take the class with you? That would be great. And then help them convince their friends to take the class, because that way they will feel more like they belong. It's like built into that recruiting process. So recruit in groups, have friends recruit their friends. When you're recruiting, make sure that or when you're talking about computing and computing occupations, make sure that you use inclusive language. Don't have your examples all talk about Steve and I don't know, Matthew. Instead, make sure that you use names that have a wider range of ethnicity, of gender, or that are ambiguous. Casey. Casey could be male or female. Different names like that you could use. So, and make sure you don't always use male pronouns. These are all sorts of subtle ways that we're communicating about who we think belongs in computing. And people pick up on it, even if it's subconsciously. So try and be careful about what your mental image is when you're talking about students in computing and computer scientists. Set up a welcoming physical environment. There's been really cool research that finds that we communicate stereotypes about who belongs in a physical setting by the style, the things that are in that environment. So, for example, if you have like a nerd corner, if you have Mario and Luigi done with discs decorating your wall, if you have Star Trek posters, well, yes, this will definitely appeal to some students, but there's also this whole host of students who are not already attracted to computing, who feel like they don't belong when that's what the environment is like. You're basically saying that people who like this stuff already are the ones who belong in computing. And that's too narrow. We want to broaden it. So think about your physical environment. Make it more broadly appealing. Don't have, like some college labs do, stacks of sculptures made out of empty Mountain Dew soda cans. Um, Use plants, use landscape pictures on the wall. Try and make it inviting to a broader range of students. And I'm not telling you to put up pink billboards, okay? While that might attract some students you haven't been attracting, it might exclude a number of others. And so, again, try and make it broadly appealing in your room. And also in promoting belonging and inclusivity, tell your students, talk to them as individuals, and tell them that you want them to study computing. But please don't say, because we need more women in computing. Yeah, make it a little bit more personal than that. Okay, do not set the student up to be a representative of their ethnic group or their sex, because that makes things more difficult for them. You can describe the prevalence of CS by examples like this. The students on this slide, they're from Uganda, and they created an app that diagnoses malaria without having to stick needles in anyone. So that's tremendously cool. It shows more diversity in computing. It shows the application of computing to something that might appeal to a broader range of students. Again, so it might be a message that would help perhaps international students or African American students or students who are interested in medicine feel like they could belong in computing because the other people who are there are interested in things that interest them.
So how do I identify women or young women in my high school that would be good at computer science when I only teach my certain number of students? So how do I identify those students when I already have the ones I know, but how do I find other ones? How do I identify other students, female students, or students of underrepresented or minority students? How do I identify those so that I can have those conversations when I don't teach them right now?
Okay, so there are a lot of different ways, and we'll talk in more detail about those, some examples of ways that people have done it before successfully. One thing that I would say is that you want to think about where there are concentrations of students who are likely to have the necessary background. I don't know how you teach your course, whether it's math intensive or not math intensive, but certainly if it is, you want to make sure that the students that you're trying to attract have that foundation that they'll need. So once you figure that part out, then where are they likely to concentrate? You want to go after friendship groups if you can. Student government, these are usually high-achieving students, right? You don't have to go yourself. You could send maybe some of your current students. Maybe you have students, and students who are in student government already and have other friends in student government. You don't want to send someone who is a sort of stereotype of students in computing. You want to send someone who is really part of that group that you're trying to recruit. And so student government could be great, yearbook could be great. Those tend to have loads of young women in them, and they would be a good place for you to start.